I make my living writing nonfiction book for adults. What we're going to be talking about today is not writing per se. The craft of writing is a whole different workshop, which I don't think I'm qualified to teach you. What I want to share with you is what I've learned about how the publishing industry really works. It's very mysterious from the outside, but I've been more or less on the inside for a long time. I'm going to be telling you what I've learned from my own work, which doesn't include everything. I don't write fiction, so I don't know much about the fiction submission process. I don't write poetry. I'm also not going to talk a lot about memoir, except in very general terms. I write nonfiction books for the general reader, for the general adult reader, in two big clusters. Under my own name, I write gardening books and cookbooks, primarily. Sometimes there's a crossover. I also work as a ghostwriter. Those are exclusively business books, meaning books on business topics for the general reader, typically written by a person in the business world who has a reputation in the subject matter, but not the time or the ability to write a whole book. It usually happens this way. All publishing houses have a team of salespeople who go around the country. Actually, they have a geographic territory that they cover, and they call them bookstores, and they present the upcoming titles. Here's the catalog, here's what's coming up in 2 or 3 months. I think your customers would particularly like this one and this one and this one. But what they're really doing, but part of what they're really doing is picking up ideas, so they come back to the mothership with a little bit of intelligence, and they tend to say, we really need a book on X. And so a smart editor will go out into the business world and find somebody who has a reputation as an expert in X and says, how'd you like to write a book for us? And that person very often says, I don't know how to write a book, or I don't have time, so forget it. Then the editor will say, that's okay, we've got somebody that can help you with that, a professional writer to work with you. And they mean me or hundreds of other people like this. I don't have to go out and look for those jobs, they tend to come to me. I've been doing it for a while, and some of those books have been enormously successful. So I'm kind of well known in that category. Now, if I wanted to sell myself as a ghostwriter in medieval history, I'd have trouble because I don't have any credentials in that area. But if you're talking business books, which is a perpetual category that always does well year after year, then my name usually pops up in people's minds. I make an effort to keep those contacts fresh, but I never go out and say, by the way, I'm looking for work. But I don't do it that way. Today's class is not about promoting my books, although I'm going to use 3 of my books as an example. There's 10 years between each one of them, a whole span of 20 years. I was doing something else in between times. But those 3 books illustrate some points that I want to make, some things that I think you guys ought to know about. If you later on think of something, this is my business card, this is how you can reach me. Also, there are 2 piles of recipe cards. This is an illustration of the kind of marketing and promotion stuff that's very handy to have in your back pocket. My publisher did these, but I could do it myself at a fairly low cost. We just print up a couple of hundred and just give them away. If any of you would like to be on my mailing list, don't have to worry. I'm not gonna swamp you with stuff. It'll just be 1 or 2 short articles a month, either on a gardening topic or a cooking topic or a writing topic. I've been collecting funny grammar mistakes. And if you would like to receive that, all you would need to do is put your John Hancock in this book, Publishing, like every other industry, has its own vocabulary. I'm going to use those words because you need to know them. And also because some smart person said, half of wisdom is calling things by their right name. If I use a term you don't understand, if I talk about anything at all that you don't understand, speak up right then and there. I don't mind being interrupted. I really like it. What you have here on your handout is a very, very broad agenda. Specific questions that might fall within there that occur to you either now or later or when we get to that. Please ask me. So that's what today is all about. I want you to leave here with a little bit of understanding about how the book publishing industry actually operates, what's involved in various steps. Now, I'm going to use my own experiences. And my books are published by leading mainstream publishing houses in New York under what is known as a traditional format. That is, I sign a contract in which I give them the right to publish the book. In exchange for that, they give me a royalty agreement, including an advance. Now, that's the kind of standard, traditional way the publishing world has worked for a long time. There's a lot of new stuff now that I am less familiar with. I don't know a great deal about the self-publishing platforms, except to urge you to be very, very careful. There's a lot of people who will take your money and not give you much in return. But if you're at all interested in being published in what I tend to call the regular way, the standard, what we've been using all along way, which ends up with your books being sold to the world, bookstores, Amazon, libraries, specialty stores, where the publisher takes care of all of that. That's traditional publishing. So that's the perspective from which my experience comes. I also want to point out, and we'll go over some of these if we have time. If we run out of time, I'll just have to leave you to explore this on your own. The resources sheet, which is the second sheet here. If you have an interest, or if you have an ambition to be published by one of the big mainstream publishing houses, you need to start learning what they're all about and who works there and what their particular interests are and where they fit into the overall picture. And that's what I mean with this top one, to learn about the industry. These are just internet things to explore. So you start getting familiar, the names will start to be familiar with you, and you'll kind of know how to react when you see something. Remember, I'm going to use 3 of my books to give you a little bit of foundation, because I'll probably refer back to them. I have written, under my own name, I've written 11 books. 2 of them were self-published back in the day when that meant writing the book, finding a typesetter, finding somebody to do the paste up, although I knew how to do that, so I did that step. Finding a printer, finding an illustrator, finding a distributor, doing all the promotion, doing everything. And you end up with boxes of books that you then got to do something with, you know. One of those 2 was later picked up by Globe Pequot, which is a small independent publisher in New England. It does a lot of outdoors books, outdoor recreation, nature guides, stuff like that. The other 9 were all published by 8 of the 9 were published by major New York houses. The 9th one was published by another small independent press called Chicago Review Press, which has expanded greatly since I've worked with them. So those are all 9 of those are the traditional author contract format. There's a spectrum of work, and ghostwriting is here, and deep editing is here, and in the middle there's a function called collaboration, which is essentially what I do, and people in the publishing world understand it if I say I'm a collaborator. But usually I just say ghostwriting because people have heard that term and they kind of know what it means. I have done more than a dozen major ghostwriting jobs where I indeed did the writing, or heavy collaboration where I did half the writing. And a couple of them were big-time bestsellers. So, in fact, I'm about to start another one with this same individual. It'll be our 7th book together. Let me just tell you the story of one of them, because this is pretty typical. This gentleman that I just referred to had an idea to write a book about Warren Buffett. He, the author, wanted to write about Buffett because he modeled his own investment philosophy on how Mr. Buffett does his work. Well, Buffett has billions of dollars to invest, and what this gentleman wanted to do was break it down into steps that us regular people could adapt if we wanted to. And he wanted to do that because he was just starting in the industry, and he thought it would be a good way to promote his own expertise, which, as it turned out, it was. He ended up with an agent, and to this day I'm not entirely sure how this happened, who was disreputable, I have to say. And all this person did, he finally found his way to John Wiley & Sons, which is one of the big New York houses. Now, as it happens, I know the editor at Wiley who ended up with this book. Because at that point, Miles just had like a third of the book and an outline. Because that's the way you sell nonfiction. You sell it with a proposal, which has a full detailed outline and a couple of sample chapters. He was not sure how to, and finally Miles called me and said, "This guy's driving me crazy, will you take over? Will you just be me?" and work with him all the way through. So I said, sure. And I got to the point where I had his outline, and I coached him through writing. That was more a coaching job than anything. Now, he hadn't written before, and it wasn't very good, but you could see that the information was there. It just wasn't expressed with any grace, you know. It wasn't even clear half the time. So in that case, he would write, I would give him some ideas about how to get started with that next chapter. He would write it and send it to me, and I would redo it and send it back and say, "What do you think of this?" So gradually, he got better. About halfway through, I called Miles and said, "I think you've got a hit on your hands. Stop ducking his calls." But more than that, whatever your print run is, that's how many books get printed the first time out. I want you to double it. Whatever your promotion budget is, I want you to double it. Because I think this is going to be big. And there was dead silence for about 20 seconds. Oh man, what have I done? And then he said, "Tell me more." So I went through where we were and what I could see the next chapter was going to be really strong. To his credit, Miles jumped in and got way behind it. And this is another thing I want you to understand. Big publishers like John Wiley put out hundreds of books a year. They've got maybe a half a dozen editors who have only the time to really grab onto one or two in each publishing cycle, but there are 2 a year. And so Miles got behind the book. He got a guy named Peter Lynch, who at the time was the golden boy in the investment world, to write a foreword, and he did a whole lot of promotion. Well, that book was on the New York Times bestseller list for 27 weeks. Practically unheard of for a business book. It was Wiley's first New York Times bestseller in 102 years. So Robert and I were golden, and that's why it was so easy to do these other books. And we're starting on number 7.
So can I just ask?
Yeah.
Once you do you finally get him to the end of the manuscript.
Right.
You got all the way through the outline.
Right.
Does it go to a copy editor then? How do you?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It
so
does.
it goes into regular production.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. So we talked about timeline, memoir versus autobiography, and all types of editing. It either happens that I get a pure ghostwriting job. I start with nothing. I start with a blank page or a blank computer screen. And I get delivered anything that's available. It might be journal articles that this person has written, or transcripts of industry talks that they've done, or sometimes it's just me on the phone hour after hour pulling information out of them. What happens more often is they somehow or other get put together a manuscript or the start of a manuscript which people see has promise, or like what I described before, they went to this person and asked them to do it, but it's just not publishable. And so then I'm brought in and I restructure it completely. A book has to hold your interest from beginning to end, otherwise why bother? Finding a way to make that happen is part of what I do. So I read all the material and swim around in it until I feel comfortable with what we're talking about. And then I look for try to develop a new architecture, something that would make it interesting to follow, that would make it, people would want to stick with it. They could easily grasp the main ideas. So I start with a rough manuscript or a partial manuscript, and then I use that as raw material and start a new manuscript. The nominal author, the person whose name is going to be on the book, is there because they are recognized as an expert in the subject matter. My name means diddly squat to people in that field. My name's not even on the book. That's my choice. So there's a lot of back and forth. Although what often happens is after a couple of times of back and forth on a certain chapter, they just tend to say, "What are you doing? Just send it to me when you're done." The goal is to make it sound like this person wrote it. And that's voice. You guys all understand the concept of voice in writing. For some way, and I don't know how, I have learned how to pick up on that quickly and write the new stuff in that person's voice, so that when the book comes out, they can't tell the difference. In fact, they often think they wrote it because it sounds like something they would say. I don't know. I can just do it. So the other way it happens at this end of the scale is they have a complete manuscript which has all the information in it, but it's a mess, and I just rip it apart and restructure, build a whole new architecture and restructure it, and maybe write some new pieces to transition from one to the other. Also, this author has a contract with the publisher, and the contract specifies several things. The contract solidifies the agreement between the author and the publishing house, which is a business and a creative person. The author gives the publishing house the right to publish and distribute the book. The publishing house gives the author certain consideration, monetary consideration, which is a royalty schedule. The royalty is a percentage of the book's sales, generally net sales. Remember, well, maybe you don't know, but now you do. They sell the books to bookstores, etc., at a great discount. So when you go into a store and buy a $20 book, the store probably paid $10 for it, or $11.20 or something like that. So the royalty, if it's say 10%, is 10% of the $11, not the $20. So an advance is an advance against future royalties. So you get the advance, which is a lump sum, usually broken into 2 or 3 parts. And then you don't get any more until the book sells enough that they have recovered the advance. It's called earning out. Soon as your book earns out the advance in sales, then you start getting the royalties later. And it comes twice a year, and it's usually 3 months behind time. The most common calendar is January to June and July to December. So the December royalty statement will arrive in March or April, hopefully with a check.
When you finish a manuscript,
Yes.
and it's accepted by the acquisitions editor, whoever's
Right.
accepting it, it goes into production, and in copy editing there are often lots of queries.
Yes.
Because the copy editor will say, this isn't really quite clear, I don't really quite
Yeah,
get
right.
this. So who do those queries go to? Do they go to you? To the ghostwriter who actually wrote the book?
Yes, if we make that arrangement. What I was starting is, thank you for asking that. So with ghostwriting, the author, the nominal author, has his, and let's face it, they usually are men, his own contract with the publisher. He and I have a separate contract. And that spells out who's going to do what. And we have a conversation before we formalize it, and I say, there will be, especially if it's a first-timer, there will be this copy editing process, and that'll produce a whole bunch of queries. Do you want me to see that as part of my duties, or do you want to deal with it? So that we decide right then and there, and then that goes in our contract.
If they're naive authors, do they know what they're talking about? Do they know what copy editor queries are?
If they don't, that's a good. That conversation is a good chance to clear that up.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And what is a query?
A query, it would be a question
About the topic?
about, more likely about the wording of a particular section. Copy editors focus on fine points of grammar and syntax. They also are responsible for coding the manuscript for final typesetting. A nonfiction book that has a lot of subheads. There's one major subheads, and then within that there's some secondary subheads. There's a hierarchy of subheadings. So the copy editor is usually in numbers, a 1 in a circle. This is a top level, A level subhead. This is a B level subhead, and this is a chart graph, and it should be da-da-da. Also, if there's any artwork in it, like tables or graphs or stuff, and the text refers to a certain table, copy editor's job is to make sure that whatever the text says is actually what's in the table. Those kind of fine point things. And very often, because it's absolutely true for everybody, the person who wrote it can't tell that it's not clear. It's clear to them, they know exactly what they meant, but it's not clear to the person reading it. And that's the job of a copy editor.
Somewhere along the way, I'm sure you're going to get into the dollars and cents, dollars part of it, as far as like, and I keep thinking about it. So I just thought I'd mention it because it's in my mind here. I'm anticipating you're going to touch on that subject when you started talking about the contract between the publisher and the author who's going to be on the book, and a separate contract between you and the author.
Right.
That seems like it gets a little tricky then. It's like this guy, the author, is thinking, okay, I'm going to get this check, but then he's also thinking, I got to pay
Right.
you.
Right. Well, if there's an agent involved, that is simplified because all the money goes to the agent. And if my I'll use myself. If my arrangement with the nominal author is that I get X percentage of the next royalty check, the agent writes 2 checks.
With all this potential negotiation going on, is it necessary to have an attorney involved?
I have never used an attorney. There's a couple of writers organizations, American Society of Journalists and Authors, that when you are accepted as a full-fledged member of them, you get the use of their attorney for answering questions and stuff. That person could help you with the contract. There probably are attorneys in the Portland area that specialize in this area. I unfortunately don't know about them. What I did with my contract is I did a little research, and I pulled out sample contracts that I found on the internet, and I pulled out the things that seemed to be important, and I wrote my own. And I wrote it in just regular, ordinary English. And let me tell you, the funniest thing that happened, the very first time I did this was with a guy whose first name is Stan. And one of the items is, this contract represents the full understanding between the parties. So I specify what the scope of my involvement will be and the time frame that we need to agree to in order to meet the publisher's delivery date, because that's a big issue with the author contract with the publisher. It's called delivery and acceptance. So in order for us to do all what we have to do, then to get it here, we have to do this intermediate deadline and this one and this one. And if that falters, the consequences will be X, Y, and Z. Either I put in lots of overtime hours for an additional fee, or your publishing date slips. Those are really the only two possibilities. So my contract says 100% of the advance, or in any case no less than a floor, which I keep increasing that year after year because my reputation is getting stronger and stronger, and I can get away with that. And then X amount of any future royalties from whatever source and in whatever time frame.
Time frame, I mean, you could drink a lot of coffee and get a lot of work done within 2 months. Or how do you set a dollar amount or percentage? Because it seems like the publisher would be looking to acquire from the writer, basically, 10,000 words or some quantity, right? Is that what they do? They measure it in words?
Yes.
Or
Yeah. So that's another element of the contract between author and publisher. Author will deliver a manuscript of approximately X number of words.
that gives you an idea of how much time
Right.
you're going to be spending.
Right. By a certain date. Now, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Remember, in some way or other, this person and I have already started having our conversations. So if it's somebody I've not worked with before, I try the best I can to get a sense of what I'll have to be working with. If they have a chapter already written, I make sure I look at that first before we start pinning down anything.
Yeah, because that kind of gives you a voice that you can carry through the rest of the chapter.
And then I also know how much work I have to do. Of course, if it's somebody I've worked with before, all this is much easier because we know each other and we know how we work together, and I can trust if they say this, and I know I'll get that. They generally do underestimate, and I know that, so I factor it up.
It seems to me like some of it, because these are things that are going to be like played out over the next several months.
Correct.
So if somebody's routinely pitching ideas and sort of closing the door on this coming season's work, is there like a set, did you say that there's like a, I know you're talking about the set time frame for royalty payments, but is there like a set time frame for when, okay, we've got our inventory that we're going to be producing for the 2020 publishing season? Because things generally will be like released in the spring, right? When shoppers are hitting the market.
Twice a year. There are two seasons in publishing, spring and fall. Spring starts in January, fall starts in September or late August.
And that's what everybody kind of like gears towards.
Right.
We're going to have this on the trucks being delivered
Right.
for January.
It's called ship date.
Oh,
It often takes a year from delivery of the manuscript to get them on the trucks. It just does.
yeah.
That's one reason why a lot of people find these Amazon self-publishing platforms appealing, because you can do it much faster. Country Tea Parties was originally published in 1996. It is now in its 10th printing. It's still in print. Remember I told you about how the sales reps kind of go out and call on bookstores and pick up ideas and bring them back. So the process works like this. It's built around an editorial meeting, which is either once a week or every other week. All the editors plus representatives from publicity and representatives from marketing and representatives from sales attend the editorial meeting, at which editors who have gotten a proposal that they like and really have fallen in love with and want the publishing company to say yes to it, they pitch that to the whole group. Because very few people, except the ones at the very top of the chain, have the authority to say yes to a proposal on their own. It generally has to be this committee decision. So it just so happened that the out-of-state reps had come into town for their twice yearly sales meeting at which they get information about the coming season's books. They get all pumped up about the new stuff. So they just sat in on the editorial meeting for the fun of it. And one of them said, we should have a book on tea parties. And Gwen held up her hand and said, and I know just the person to write it. He called me and said, this is what happened. Would you like to do this book? I said, that does not happen very often. So the moral to this story is, any way that you can grab hold of an idea from a sales perspective gives you a tremendous leg up. All right, I'm going to jump forward 10 years later. This is a book about growing a full vegetable garden of all kinds of edible plants in containers in 2002, so approximately 10 years later. The reason that this one worked is the first major book that describes how to do a vegetable garden in containers. I outlined it, I did a lot of research, I was represented by an agent at the time, and she pitched it to several big companies, and a company called Workman, which is one of the New York big guys, gave us the best offer. So Workman published this. Now the reason this one worked, the moral to this story is, it's a new idea within an established category. A lot of times people stumble with their book ideas because they haven't clarified what genre it belongs in. If booksellers can't tell where in their store to put the book, they're not going to buy it. And they're not going to order it. And if booksellers aren't going to order it, publishers aren't going to publish it. So our job as writers is to hone in on exactly where this fits in the book universe. A lot of bookstores, in fact almost all of them, order their books from wholesalers so they can do a combined order from various publishers. They'll get 3 of this and 5 of this and 12 of those and 6 of those, and it all comes in one big box. So whoever opens up that box looks at a book and says immediately, okay, this is a gardening book. I know what this is. I know what it's all about. We know how to promote it. We know where it goes. We know exactly what to do with gardening books. That's what I mean about an established category. If you start wobbling around and trying to go in between, and you start something that will fit both here and there, all you're doing is creating problems. Bookstore owners don't want problems. They want books that'll sell. That's the moral to this story is, it's an established category, but it's within that category, it's something brand new.
When you're talking about having an idea for valuable container, for example, I always think of like the way a book will often get sold or picked up by a publisher is that first a publisher has printed perhaps one of your chapters, but just as a magazine article. And that could become like a springboard for a publisher to then look at it and say, yeah, we could turn this into a book if you write 10 more chapters like this.
Sometimes it happens that way. There's 2 different tracks, and I think you might be mixing them up.
So are they really that they don't really like cross that commonly?
It does, but it's not the more common avenue. It's not the more common route.
Okay.
Sometimes remember I said it takes a year from manuscript to book. Sometime within that year, a department inside the publishing company called subsidiary rights, sub-rights, sees that it has potential as a magazine article.
Yeah.
And so they will sell one chapter to a magazine.
And that kind of excites interest in the literary world.
Right.
It's like, hey, there's a book coming out.
Exactly right. Plus the author gets a little bit of money from that. But mostly what it does is it starts this excitement going. So that's one avenue. The other avenue is that the author himself takes one element of the future book, which he's still working on, and makes a magazine article and pitches that to a magazine.
just to see if he maybe wants to end up including it in the book.
Or just to see what happens.
Yeah.
Now, it may be that it attracts the attention of a publisher. More likely, it will add to the author's resume when he puts a full proposal together to say, and by the way, an excerpt from this book is going to be appearing in Guns N' Roses, down the road in September, something like that.
And that's not a bad thing, right? I mean,
No,
if you
it's a
were-
good thing.
If you had 2 magazine articles published and you were talking to a publisher about putting a book together, they would consider
That
those
would
as
consider-
favorable.
Absolutely,
elements.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, this is a very good question. Okay, so, remember, I make my living doing this, so I'm always got my antenna out for new ideas, something that I think would make a book. Sometimes it just smacks me in the face, and that's what happened with this book. This book is about 5 years old, 5 years old now. It's in its 3rd printing. It took me a long time to get it right. This is a book about how neighborhoods create a real sense of community in their neighborhood by having a regular soup night and inviting everybody, so that people who aren't acquainted, even though they might live 3 or 4 houses down, which happens more often than you might think, can actually get to know everybody and start building a real strong sense of community that's valuable to children, valuable to old seniors, and wonderful, absolutely wonderful in so many ways. My brother in Portland lives on a street that does a soup night, and when I was invited to one, and within 5 minutes, I knew I was looking at something special. And so I decided to frame it. By that time I was representing myself. I framed it around social capital, which was getting a lot of articles in highfalutin magazines about social capital. And nobody could explain what it really was. And I thought, oh, I get it. Here it is. It's right in front of me. So I built my proposal around social capital, and I did why it's so important. And here's a beautiful example of it right here in my hometown, and I want to tell you about it. And I sent it to a dozen editors by name at major New York houses, and they all said, no, thank you. The ones that gave me any feedback at all said some version of this. It's too much sociology for us. And I thought, no, that's valid. That is really valid. But I know there's something here. So how else can I tell this story? So then the next idea that I had was I was going to be this intimate conversation between me and the reader. I was going to say, take my hand. We're going to walk down the street together. I'm going to stop at every house along the way. I'll introduce you to some wonderful people, and we'll have some great soup. We'll go all the way to the corner, cross over, all the way back. Because I think they're all fascinating people. And what they've accomplished is truly extraordinary. Well, nobody wanted that one either. So I just put it aside. And then several years later, when I was at a kind of a stalled out, I finished one and project, and what I needed to start the next one hadn't arrived yet, so I pulled it out. And I sent it to, by then I was representing myself, this publisher, which in the meantime had been acquired by this publisher, which is another thing we ought to talk about, is the trend towards merging in major publishing houses. And an editor there got back to me really fast and said, we'd like to publish your book. But, she said, this is on the phone, right? If it's going to be a story title, cookbook, we'll have to have more than 30 recipes. We would need at least 100, and I don't know if you want to do that. So I thought, it's a good thing she can't see me, because I went, oh, sure, I can do 100 recipes. Anyway, I guess the moral to that story is don't give up. If you're really certain that you have a good idea, don't give up. So, now, you guys have been really patient, and I thank you for taking too long to go through this. Traditional publishing is this kind of stuff, what we've been talking about. a standard royalty-based contract between the author and the publisher, in which the author says to the publisher, yeah, I will give you the publishing rights, which, by the way, is completely different from copyright. I can't believe how many people get that mixed up. Copyright and publishing rights are totally different. And in consideration of that, we'll do all the work, we'll bear all the production and promotion expenses. We will give you a certain amount of money distributed thus. And you give us a manuscript of a certain length by a certain date, and we'll take it from there. That's essentially what the publishing contract is. Self-publishing used to be what I described as my book, many years ago, a little book about growing houseplants in the Northwest. Today, the mechanics of getting the book done are much simpler. There are a lot more options, which means there's a lot of people who hung out their shingle as supporting authors who are trying to do a self-publishing thing, and they will charge you a lot of money for not doing much at all. I recommend that if you want to explore that, stay with the Amazon companies. Do you all know the difference between electronic publishing and print on demand? So we talk about that a little bit. Print on demand. Print on demand means that, let's use Amazon's, because they're the biggest, they're the big dog in this field. They have the so-called publishing plates stored. And when somebody orders that book through Amazon, they print one copy and mail it to them. They don't have a warehouse full of them, but they print it on demand. You can also buy an electronic book for reading on your Kindle or whatever device you have. And that is the same thing. They have stored the whatever's needed to create the e-book, so to speak, and then you buy it and you can download it onto your Kindle and read it. The Amazon company is called KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. There's some others, kind of second-level stuff that I don't have any experience with. There's some major drawbacks to this. There used to be a real stigma against self-publishing, and people thought if you have to go that route, it's because your book isn't good enough to attract a, quote, real publisher. Some of that stigma has gone away, but not entirely. It is next to impossible to get your books reviewed in any of the acknowledged review outlets. It's next to impossible to get your book in bookstores. So you inhabit a kind of a side world, shadow world of publishing in which some big entity in the sky has the mechanical ability to publish your book. Publish meaning make it available to the public. And that's what they do, and you do everything else. That's the other drawback, is you're completely on your own for all kinds of marketing, which is, if you do it right, a full-time job in itself. And if you don't do it right, why are you bothering? Well, there might be reasons that you want to do it. You want to do your personal story or your grandparents' story, so you have it down in writing for your children and their children. That's a very real, respectable reason. You've come across your great-grandmother's recipe cards and you want to make a cookbook out of it. That would be lovely. You know, those kinds of things are completely acceptable in my mind. And there are a few very rare cases of people hitting it big with a self-published book and drawing the attention of a major publishing house who then offers them a gigantic contract. It does happen once in a great while. Don't make your plans around that. I would like to encourage you to at least make a stab at attracting the attention of a traditional publishing house, which doesn't necessarily mean one of the big guys. We think of, they're on kind of a pyramid, these publishing houses, and at the top are companies called the Big Five. It used to be the Big Six. Then Penguin and Random House merged a few years ago, so now it's the Big Five. And each of them has smaller companies that they've acquired over time, and those are recognizable names, like St. Martin's or Random House itself, and they become imprints of the larger umbrella company. It is next to impossible to, as an unpublished author, to land a contract with somebody with one of the Big Five guys without an agent. So if that is your ambition, your first goal must be to nail an agent. Maybe I shouldn't use that term. To find an agent who would like to represent you.
Pin it down.
Pin it down, thank you. And if you like, I will tell you how to do each of those. There's another, but there's the Big Five, that's not all there is. There's a whole other category. If we put these kind of on a mountain, this would be right below the Big Five. Large, independent houses. Workman is one. That's a huge operation. It now has 6 imprints. It just hasn't made its way into the Big Five yet. If they don't watch out, they're going to be taken over by PRH, which would really bother me. And they can give you the same attention in the world, in the book world, that you would want for your book. Then lower down from that is there's a category called small presses, which generally don't pay an advance. They will pay royalty, and they will do a really good job within their narrow niche. They generally just cover a particular couple of subject matters. They will do a real good job of making your book available to bookstores that specialize in or cover that particular subject matter, whatever it is. But you sort of think of it like a mountain, you know, and then there's the self-publishing stuff. The second page in your handout is all kinds of resources. One of them is the website of a woman named Jane Friedman. As far as I can tell, Jane makes her living going around to writers' conferences and giving talks, but she also produces once a year this really nice graphic that shows what I've just described to you in columns: the Big Five, the independents, the small presses, and then the various self-publishing options. So you can see kind of at a glance how it all lays out, and will help you kind of make a decision about which way you want to start. Which of these paths you want to put your feet on first and explore first. Not to say you can't do several at the same time, but without an agent, the only way to attract the attention of an editor at one of the Big Five houses would be to do something spectacular that gets you in a major newspaper. Now, I have a very close friend who lives in a very tiny town on the Washington coast, who was part of a recent story in the New York Times Magazine last week's issue. She's a very good writer, and I've been pushing her for years to get to think bigger about this stuff. I just have this feeling that some smart person is going to read that because that's what they do. They read this stuff all the time, looking for ideas. Somebody's going to see it and track her down and offer her a good deal. Man, that would be so cool. That kind of thing does happen, but you can't you certainly can't build a writing career out of it. Okay. That's traditional published versus self-publishing. Any questions about that? Am I going too fast? The submissions process is this. And it's the same whether you're talking to an agent or an editor, right, a publisher company. In either case, you want to do whatever research you can to come up with the actual name of a specific human being and be sure you spell it right. And the first thing you do is a short query, who you are, what your idea is, and how far along you are. Should be 3 or 4 paragraphs, no more. If they say, if it's a nonfiction book, you say, would you like to see the proposal? Which means you have to have the proposal ready, because if somebody says yes, you don't want to have to wait 3 months until you get your proposal done, by which time they will have forgotten you or moved on to some other person. If it's fiction, you have to have written the whole book, especially if you are unknown to them. So your query letter is, the purpose of that is to get them to ask you to take the next step. The next step being send the proposal if it's a nonfiction book, or send the manuscript if it's fiction. Now, a memoir, although it is nonfiction, that is to say, it's true. I hope you're not making up stuff. But it's, in the submission process, it's treated as fiction in that you need to have written the whole thing. Because the decision is made based completely on the quality of the writing. Unless some famous person, in which case maybe it'll work, but maybe not. Now, the difference between memoir and autobiography is this. Autobiography describes your whole life. Memoir is built around a particular incident, a particular thread in your family story, a particular dynamic in your family, a specific discrete element which is strong enough to carry a whole book. A lot of people are interested in writing memoirs. It is an oversaturated market, and that's an understatement. So if that is your goal, make peace with the fact that you might have to self-publish it and make it available to your family and close friends, and let that and be satisfied with that.
And what was the one before that? It's not a memoir, it's a...
Autobiography.
What was the topic you just said? You were just saying that be comfortable having your family look at it. What was the topic?
A memoir.
A memoir.
A memoir, because that market is so oversaturated. I don't mean any disrespect when I say this, but everybody thinks they have a memoir in them. And maybe they do, and maybe not. But in any case, you're up against 10 million other people who think they have a good memoir. It's an oversaturated market.
And autobiography, what's the difference?
Autobiography describes your whole life, from the beginning to where you are now.
So if your intent is to produce a memoir, maybe you don't want to call it a memoir.
Maybe.
Cut out part of that battle.
Yeah, you could do.
Unnecessary.
Yeah. You could call it a nonfiction thriller.
Yeah, what if you write it as a novel based on true events?
Yeah. That's actually a very good strategy. Turn it into a novel. Editors. Let me tell you about editors. It is, that single word is applied to a lot of different jobs. This woman sitting behind you who had to leave her asked about copy editing. And I told you a little bit about what copy editors do. Within a publishing house, there are production editors whose job it is to take a manuscript when it's finished, delivered from the author, all the way through the printing process. If there's photographs in there, then permission needs to be gathered. Sometimes the author's responsible for that, sometimes not. If there's a chart, a graph with columns of stuff, somebody has to make that. And so it's the production editor's job to pull all the tangible, physical pieces together. Often that person, or the managing editor, and sometimes that's one person who does both jobs, uses the services of a freelance copy editor. Even very large publishing houses only have a tiny staff of in-house copy editors because there are a bajillion people in the world who do it on a freelance basis, and it's a lot easier for them to use those people because they save all the payroll costs. So the managing editor's job is to book the services of a freelance copy editor. And while the copy editing is happening, the managing editor or production editor does all the other stuff to make sure. It's like a traffic cop, really. Make all the pieces come out right at the end. Because new books are displayed and promoted in the publisher's catalog, which comes out twice a year to echo the 2 seasons that I described to you. And that has to be produced in a way that they need. It's a big fancy 4-color printing job, and so it has to be designed and produced ahead of the time. So the cover design has to be completely finalized because in the catalog is a big picture of the cover of the forthcoming book. It's just one reason why the whole damn process seems to take so long, because all these steps have to happen in advance of the actual books on the truck going to the bookstores. So, thank you so much for coming. Bye-bye. There is another type of editor, and occasionally there's 1 or 2 of these on staff, but usually not, called developmental editor. Oh, I skipped a step. If you put this on a spectrum, you start off with copy editing, the next thing in line is called line editing, which is what people usually picture when they hear the word editor. It's a line editor who decides this sentence is really clunky and I can improve it. So they cross out a sentence and rewrite it. Or they discover that there's a character named Aaron, and back in chapter 1 his name was Eric, and now all of a sudden he's Aaron, and that kind of stuff. Or the same word is used over and over again, so that it's sort of getting to be boring. Or there's too much here and not enough here. So that's all line editing, and you do it line by line by line. That's why it's called line editing. This is where ungainly words get reshaped into something else, and clumsy sentences get rewritten, and long paragraphs get broken into short paragraphs, like that. So it's easier to read, and maybe with a little grace in there somewhere. The next along the line is developmental editing, which is somebody like me is presented with a fully written manuscript that is an absolute mess. And what you do is you rip it apart into pieces, rearrange those pieces, throw some of them away, write some new ones, so you are developing a completely new architecture. But the same ideas are still there. Yeah.
So when you were a kid, did you sit around and think, I think I'll be an editor? think I'll be a writer.
No.
I think I'll be a,
Nope,
what were you gonna do?
I had no idea. All I knew was as soon as I graduated college, I grew up in the South, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. As soon as I graduated college, I headed for New York, and I went to work at publishing companies.
That right?
I went to work at publishing houses,
Oh,
took my English degree, knocked on the doors, and that's how I learned copy editing. And I also learned that they use all these freelancers. So the person who asked me before, how did I get started, I started selling my services as a freelance copy editor. And one of the first companies that I worked for is a company called McMinnville, which is the book publishing unit of the American Management Association, and therefore a lot of business books. This is where I met Miles. And basically everything that happened to me after that is because of relationships that I built. Now, I work hard at keeping these relationships alive because I depend on these people to send me work. But I'm delicate about it. You know? If, for instance, somebody says something like, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you yesterday, it was my birthday and I took the day off, I make a little note. Sarah's birthday is October 12th, and next October I send her a birthday card. Or because we live where we live, we have these beautiful picture postcards, I just send them a pretty postcard of the voyage and it says, hi, I wish you were here. It's so pretty here today, I wish you were here. So, okay. I just want them to remember me.
keep you in mind.
Keep me in mind, yeah. Then there's the collaborator, which I already described, and the ghostwriter, which I described. So this is all the full breadth of editorial work. Now, the people inside the publishing house whose job it is to evaluate proposals, actually to evaluate queries, and say, I don't think there's room, this is not for us, but this might be, I'd like to see the proposal. Those are called acquisitions editors. And there's a hierarchy of those. At the very top is what's called editorial director. It's what we used to call editor-in-chief. And then there are executive editors, and then there are senior editors, and then there are editors, and then there are associate editors and assistant editors. Assistant editors are essentially secretaries. They're young and idealistic, and after a while you might get promoted up to the next level, and up to the next level, to the next level. Now, in the resources, I showed you how to keep track of what's happening in the publishing area. One of them is the Publisher's Lunch newsletter. It comes out every day, and there's always a section of who's been promoted or who's switched from one publishing house to another, which they do all the time. If you've already been in contact or somebody has given you a name of a certain editor and you see that person's has gotten a promotion, it's a good thing to know that, because you can send them a little postcard that says, congratulations. Yeah.
Are there any Harvey Weinsteins in there?
Undoubtedly, but I don't know them. I mean, I don't know who it would be. They're everywhere, aren't they?
Yeah, but he was in a position where so many people gravitated over there that
Yeah.
they had a different kind of position.
Yes.
So the people who would make it are the ones who recognize quality talent and not just someone they wanted to kind of help get up their mind.
Right. So what editors don't do, now, when an editor receives a proposal that they love and they fall in love with the idea and they go to the next editorial committee meeting and they manage to get everybody to sign on to it, and she by the way, publishing as an industry, book publishing is largely dominated by women, all the way up to the top. She will call the author and say, hey, we'd like to offer you a book deal. At that point, the editor's job is to make sure there's a dynamite cover, make sure that the early on publicity plan is exactly right, make sure that all the future marketing materials accurately describe the book, because the author's back wherever he or she lives writing the book, but she's bought it on the basis of the proposal. She's not going to, in all likelihood, nobody believes this, but I'm telling you it's true, in all likelihood is not going to read the full manuscript when it comes in, and she's certainly not going to edit it. That editor has got all these other things they have to take care of. So, it's not true. In the old days, that was not the case, but it is now, because there's so much work being done. And they spend their whole time in meetings anyway. If they want to read a manuscript, they got to take them home. You know? Now, an agent, the agent's job is to stay current with every editor at every publishing house, which is a trick because they move around all the time, and which publishing companies are about to merge with which other ones, and how that might change, and all that stuff, so that when they agree to take on a project, either an author's full stuff, or you can make an arrangement with an agent to just represent me on with just this first book, one book. It's either one book or a lifetime. Although, of course, you can divorce each other at some point. So their goal, their task is to identify the exact right editor to submit the idea to. And then to do everything possible to keep it going, make sure that if you run into any trouble, they can backstop you with the publishing house. And as I say, they manage the money. Whatever monies are due to the author are funneled to the agent, who takes the agent's commission, which is usually 15%, and sends the balance on to the author. And when I say all that financial arrangements last in perpetuity, if you write a book that Walt Disney Studios decide to make a movie on and they give you $1 bajillion, the agent is going to take 15% of that $1 bajillion.
50%?
15.
15.
1-5.
Still a healthy chunk.
Well, let me tell you what I did. When I told you I sold this book myself, but when it came time to negotiate the contract, I hired a consultant who used to be an agent, and I paid her a flat fee to negotiate the contract, and she got me a much better deal it more than covered her fee. So there's ways around that, even if you don't feel completely comfortable being your own negotiator. There's a lot of information online, and as I pointed out before, it's easy to get sort of swallowed up. You're going to get to the point where all you do is looking up stuff and you're working on your book. But you can tell after a while if you're looking at a sample contract and it comes from some established writers organization, that's worth looking at. And you'll find, may not use it word for word, but there'll be something. And then there are the magazines like The Writer and Writer's Digest. They always have stories like, the mechanics of this kind of stuff. There's all kinds of stuff in there. And, you don't have to subscribe. Go to the website. The other thing that I want to talk a little bit about is book promotion. Sometimes people, particularly if they're new to the game, they say and they've got a book deal going, they say things like, oh yeah, I'll be happy to go on the Today Show. Well, sure you would, who wouldn't? But there's a lot more to it, and it is no longer the case that the author can just sit back and wait for the phone to ring with these opportunities. The author is also expected to, and you'd be foolish not to, do everything that you can to also do some promotion. Either suggest places that would be a perfect place for an interview with you, if you have some local media contacts, or maybe the the alumni journal of where you went to college would be interested in us, or anything of that sort that you can think of. Which, by the way, all that stuff goes into your proposal, so you have already given some thought to it. But I'm constantly surprised at the people who think once they deliver the manuscript, their job's done. That's not true. Well, if you don't care if it sells, then fine. But if you would like to see other people buying your book and find it in the library and, you know, all that kind of stuff, which is such a thrill, then you have to be willing to jump into those waters. By, for instance, coming to your local library and offering a program. So,
NaNoWrimo is coming up.
I know. So here's some questions that were given to me. Do you ever get bored with your writing? No. Because essentially I run a small business. Basically, that's what my day is like. And when I do all of that stuff, the writing seems like a vacation, you know? It seems like a treat. If you were starting to write something, would you make short stories to submit somewhere to see if it is worth your while to continue? I personally don't, because I've been doing this long enough that I have a pretty good sense at the beginning of whether there's something there. Although, you know, sometimes I'm wrong. But if short stories, I guess if I was looking towards fiction, I might try that. But for the work I do, I mean, I've never written for a magazine, or hardly ever. I just jumped right into books because that's what was offered to me. You know, I mean, my story's a little unusual because that's what happened. You know, I told you I did a lot of copy editing for Amacom, and I part of my promotion of my services to them was that I tried to always be friendly. You know, these people in New York have this sense that who's ever calling them wants something from them, just like this. And I just tried to always be nice and be friendly and warm. And so in the process, I developed these really nice telephone friendships. One of those people moved to a different publishing house, to a different publishing operation. And she called me up one day and said, we just plan to do a series of 6 books, and these are the topics. Which one do you want? I said, Eva, are you looking for editors or writers? And she said, writers, baby. Well, one of them was houseplants, which is something I know about. And this was St. Martin's. So except for this Tea Party book, my first big book for a major New York publishing house fell into my lap because I had done all this work ahead of time to keep those contexts fresh and alive and pleasant, mutually pleasant. So no, I wouldn't, but I could see it as being a very good strategy for other people, particularly fiction writers or memoirs. If you're a memoirist, you're sort of telling a story, a narrative, and maybe there's an element of it that lends itself to a shorter piece. What do you think about life stories, similar to the Glass Menagerie? Well, we're talked about memoirs. A lot of fiction is based on somebody's life story. You know, in fact, I would venture to guess almost all of it is in one way or another. So maybe I'm not fully getting to the essence of your question. What do I think about life stories? I don't know where else you would get your ideas. Where do you get your ideas? From life, from the world. Walk outside the door and something smacking in the face.
How much are your books?
Well, if you buy all 3 of them, it's $50. That's a significant discount. The Tea Party book is $17, the gardening book is $18, and the soup cookbook is $20.
Cooking is not my
Not for you.
thing. But what a great idea to just make one thing
Yeah.
and have people come up. I think I need that book. And no tax, that's nice.
Yeah.
Do you have some here?
Right here. So, you guys must have more questions.
I need one.
Milo, did we help you at all, honey?
What?
Did we give you any ideas of what to do next?
Not really.
No,
Hell
no.
no. What's your question? Do you have any questions? Not that you should.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'd like your comments. I noticed that Tom Clancy can produce 120 books a year. Would you comment on that?
Well, doesn't he have help? Doesn't he have all, isn't he the guy that has all these other people write?
I don't
For him?
think he writes it at all.
Yeah.
He can and produce that
Yeah,
enormous number of books.
Yeah.
He started off as the ones that they made movies out of and all that. I
Yeah.
think he might have actually written those.
yeah.
I don't know, I just am skeptical.
So somebody's making a nice pot full of money, a nice pocket full of money to write a book, and he gets the credit, and they might not have been able to be published otherwise. It seems like it works out well for everybody. It's okay with me. I saw a hand over here. Yeah.
So I heard that with traditional publishing, I just kind of want a general idea of how accurate this is,
Okay,
that you really give up a lot of control over your book.
you do.
So like that they will even go so far as to rewrite endings and things like that.
I don't know about that. That
Okay.
sounds like fiction. And remember, I don't have any. I'm only telling you what I know from my own experience. I don't write fiction, so I don't know. But you don't. As the author, you have diddly squat to say about the cover. You have next to nothing to say about the layout, the interior design. You have nothing to say about whether photographs will be needed or illustrations or pen and ink drawings or any kind of illustrations at all, or what size it's going to be, or what the final price is going to be, or how it's going to be marketed. You do give up all that control. On the other hand, they pay for it all. That's the trade-off. That's the trade-off.
And they're operating from a knowledge base that you may not be, privy to,
Right.
as far as like, what's the next big color,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So I know that it is concerning fiction, so I know your
Okay,
experience
that's
is
fine.
limited. But, so let's say that you were to submit your manuscript and everything and they agree to publish it.
Right.
And then they go and they make a bunch of changes that you, as the person who put everything into it, can't live with. What happens?
At that point, I hope you have an agent,
Okay,
because your agent will fight for you.
okay.
If not, I hope you've made the effort to develop a really good working relationship with the editor and ask for an explanation. Say why you would like to just see it go in a different way. If there are changes because of X, can I have a chance to resolve X in my own way, that kind of
Okay.
stuff. I remember, this is not my world, but I have a hard time believing that if they buy your book, it's because they love the writing. And to completely change the story arc seems unlikely to me that would happen.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah. The other thing I want to just touch on real briefly, because it's going to come up, is the whole notion of the industry being so, all the acquisitions and stuff, so that there's really only 5 or 6 big publishing companies that rule the whole industry. There's both good and bad to it, and once again, I'll use my own experience. This book is published by Story. By the time I was talking to Story was a part of Workman. Now, Workman has a much bigger footprint in the publishing industry. So, they did 2 things for me that I didn't even know about. One is they have this program where that uses social media and invites people to enter a contest built around new books. Their new books for that month. It's just 12 contests a year. And the winner, I think they just draw it randomly, the winner wins a book and a thing, something of value that's connected to the topic of the book. And 1 month, my book, Soup Night book, was the winner, and so the person who won got a copy of the book and a nice big slow cooker. Pretty nice deal. But in order to enter this thing, you had to write something on Twitter. Now, I don't do Twitter because I think there's too much of it in this world, frankly. But I do have a Twitter account, and suddenly I kept getting all these messages. You have 17 new Twitter feeds, you have 26 new Twitter, and then you went on and on and on, and it was all people trying to win the book. Now, I couldn't have put that together myself. I wouldn't even know how. The other thing, which was much bigger, is, any of you guys ever watch that home shopping network?
QVC?
Yeah, QVC. Do you watch it? Well, there's one program on there called In the Kitchen with David. It's the biggest draw. He's got the biggest fan base and blah, blah, blah. It's a 3-hour show. It's all live, and they're on 24 hours a day, and it's all live. It's very weird. But in that 3 hours, there's a 6-minute block called the Cookbook Corner. So, after the soup book came out of and I had a working relationship with a publicist at the publishing house, got a phone call from him one day and said, how'd you like to come to the East Coast and go on QVC? I didn't even know what it was. I said, that's fine. And it was a day that I had already been booked to do an appearance at a bookstore in the Dalles. And I said, well, can the TV show take me a different day? No, doesn't go now. I mean, I had no idea what a big deal it was. So I would go there, and they cook a whole table's worth of stuff from the book, and this guy, David, comes up and he talks about the book, he talks about the food, blah, blah, blah. He's got a bajillion people who follow him. So, and then then people watching the show can call up and order whatever it is that he's talking about. In those 6 minutes, we sold 3,000 books. Now, in a million years, I could never have made that happen. I'm not even sure Story could, but Workman could, because it's such a much bigger company and they've done books there before. And I didn't do anything. It just was presented to me as an opportunity. So that's a good thing about this merger, mania for mergers. The bad side of it is, it also happened to me. I was trying to sell a book on herbs, because it's a passion of mine, and I had just about sold it to this editor at Rodale, when Rodale was acquired by Penguin Random House in the middle of our conversation, and now this editor had a new boss, and that boss wanted her to go in a completely different direction, so she had to say no. Like everything else in life, it's good and bad, about both sides of it. But it is a reality that you need to be aware of, because it's going to keep happening. It's going to be more and more. There's a lot of reasons to do it. There's a lot of financial, the benefits of scale is why they do it. Have 1 or 2 warehouses instead of 20 little warehouses. A lot of shipping costs and a lot of manufacturing costs, and you get price breaks on printing costs and all that stuff. Makes more sense. The only people who get caught short are the authors sometimes. You guys are so great. Thank you for sticking with us all this time.